This is Megan Skidmore, your host of the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast. As a life transitions coach, I work with LGBTQ plus families of a conservative faith background who feel their world has been turned upside down. I started the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast to attempt to bring the traditionally taboo topic of doubts and questioning out of the shadows of shame and into the sunlight. Welcome to episode 24. Thank you so much for joining me today. To start off, I'm proud to share that I'm a member of the Dialogue Podcast Network, found at dialoguejournal.com/podcast network. The Dialogue Podcast Network features shows by Latter-day Saints who wish to bring their faith into dialogue with the larger stream of world religious thought and with human experience as a whole, and to foster artistic and scholarly achievement based on their cultural heritage. I love that I am a part of this network. So much of what I just shared resonates with me. Mormonism is my cultural heritage. It is part of my human experience and has shaped so much of who I am. And all of this is really especially relevant this week. For those who also identify with the LDS faith, this coming weekend is the semi-annual General Conference, a time that many look forward to for spiritually uplifting messages and direction from our church leaders. For others, perhaps some of these messages bring cognitive dissonance, confusion, hurt, and possibly pain. If this is you, my heart genuinely goes out to you, and I hold that space of hurt with you. If this is not you, I invite you to put on the lenses of those for whom this upcoming weekend could be very difficult, for whom a place where peace once was found is now a place of sadness, perhaps. Now, to put it bluntly, unless you have been perhaps living under a rock, which I'm sure you have not, you know that many folks are experiencing a shift in their faith. Many conservative faiths, not just the LDS. Some call it a faith crisis, a faith journey, a pivot in their faith journey, or a faith expansion. I'm sure there's others. For me, I prefer a faith expansion. And why? Because that expression fills my soul with hope. And is that not what we are taught? To have a perfect brightness of hope. Expansion means bigger, greater, larger. I like to picture a hot air balloon as the heat causes the balloon to fill with warm air, and it fills every corner and pocket. And once those are filled, the balloon doesn't stop there. It takes flight. And as long as that heat stokes the fire, so to speak, that balloon continues on its journey, exploring uncharted territory and learning of things unknown to the balloonist or the traveler, we'll say, before. Since this is the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast, where my goal is to normalize having questions and doubts, I'm going to be so bold as to make 4 invitations to you today. And if you plan to listen to General Conference this weekend, and by the way, even if you're not LDS and of another faith, you can do this. These invitations are relevant to your faith of origin as well. Perhaps you can ask yourself these questions as they relate to counsel and discourses given to your church body as a whole from your leaders. The first invitation I make comes from an email I received about a week ago. It's the most recent subscriber email from Brother Kurt Frankum of the Leading Saints organization, dated March 25th. Brother Frankum lists 4 things to do this coming weekend, and I'm going to share one of them with you. And he wrote in his email to seek cognitive dissonance, not confirmation bias. And he goes on to explain. He says, I'll often hear people highlight specific talks that confirmed a belief or position that they had held previously, or they will dismiss talks that do not confirm their bias. Talks that confirm your bias are nice to hear because they make you feel like you are in line with the brethren. However, instead of looking to confirm your bias or current beliefs, Highlight those concepts you hear that go against a previously held belief or that don't sit comfortably in your mind. Or even identify your least favorite speakers and treat their talk like the most important address of the century. Take intense notes and identify specific quotes you can easily review in the days following conference. I've always had a beneficial experience wrestling with those topics that give me cognitive dissonance and then taking them to God for deeper understanding and direction. End quote. I thought this was very wise counsel. I can't really add anything else to it other than the invitation to do it, to look for those places where you notice something coming up for you, some feeling of not feeling settled or questioning or uncertainty, perhaps. And as he says, treat that as the most important part of the talk or the most important address of the century and really dive in. The second invitation I make to you is to ask yourself this question: what is my role in the ongoing restoration? And how am I expanding and growing what our forebears worked hard to establish? And to illustrate what I mean, I quote from the book Restoration by Patrick Q. Mason, historian who has held the Leonard J. Arrington Chair of Mormon History and Culture at Utah State University since 2019. In chapter 2 of his book Restoration, he says restoration is one of the terms that only makes sense when connected to something else. In other words, for a restoration to happen, something has to be restored. And this is me interjecting. I looked up, Merriam-Webster says restoration is a bringing back to a former position or condition. It's a reinstatement, i.e. the restoration of peace or restitution, or a restoring to an unimpaired or improved condition. Brother Mason continues, according to the church's bicentennial proclamation to the world, the restoration entails a restored church, restored priesthood, authority, and the restored gospel, meaning the doctrine and teachings of Jesus Christ and the prophets and apostles throughout the ages. The work of the restoration is not yet complete, but remains ongoing through the gift of continuing revelation. God continues to inspire and guide the apostles he has called to lead the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is, quote, Christ's New Testament church restored, end quote. And Brother Mason continues, he says, but here's the funny thing. As far as I've been able to discover, Joseph Smith never talked about a, quote, restored church, end quote. Not once. He says, I've scoured both the scriptures he produced and publications in the Joseph Smith papers, which aims to gather and publish every known surviving Joseph Smith document. Except in the historical introductions, which are written by modern scholars and are not part of the original sources, I have not found a single use of the phrases, quote, restored church or, quote, restoration of the church. Patrick describes this as surprising, and that you may even say it came as a revelation. He says, turns out the first time the phrase restored church was used in General Conference came in October of 1918 in a talk by Elder James E. Talmage. That is more than 88 years after the organization of the church in April of 1830. It turns out the phrase restored gospel also became popular only in the 20th century. Restored gospel appears a mere 3 times in General Conference addresses prior to 1900. Even then, it remained a modestly useful phrase until this century, when usage shot up significantly. That's the general trend for the term restoration as well. It certainly appears in 19th century General Conference talks, but in relatively low frequency, then skyrockets to unprecedented levels in the 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s. Brother Mason continues, allow it to sink in that when the earliest generations of LDS Latter-day Saints referred to restoration, they rarely invoked the phrase restored gospel and never talked in so many words about the restored church. Yet, quote, restoration, end quote, was an important part of their religious vocabulary. So What did Joseph Smith and his contemporaries think the restoration was restoring? In a word, Israel. Wait, what? And that's where I end off. So why am I sharing that with you? Here's the invitation again, number 2. And this time I'm going to add a little to ask yourself, what is my role in the ongoing restoration of Israel? How am I expanding and growing what our forebears worked so hard to establish? Okay. Invitation number 3 comes from an interview of Anthony Sweat on the Leading Saints podcast by Kurt Francom. Brother Sweat is an author, an associate professor of church history and doctrine at BYU, and has a bachelor's in painting and drawing and a PhD in curriculum and instruction. Now, although this interview related specifically to a classroom setting, the principles are broadly applicable. And the interview's focus is about navigating ambiguity in a church classroom setting. At about 39 minutes in, Brother Sweat says clarity can come through the wrestle. Teach what is declared and known without shutting off sincere comments about things that are not. In other words, try not, don't engage in managing opinions is what he called it. Listen without agreeing. And at 50 minutes in, he continues, there are clearly things that have not yet been revealed. Embrace ambiguity. Just as artists don't always reveal precisely what they had in mind in their work of art, God seems to want us to grow by wrestling with some things where only hints are provided. He wants seekers who ask and knock. So invitation number 3 is ask yourself when having discussions, where is your focus? Are you focused more on managing opinions or on listening without shutting off sincere comments? How are you a wrestler? How are you a seeker who asks and knocks, as so eloquently stated by Brother Sweat? Finally, number 4, I share words of Richard, quote, Papa Osler. He posted to Instagram recently. Brother Osler is a 2-time author of Listen, Learn, and Love, Embracing LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, as well as Listen, Learn, and Love, Improving LDS Culture. He's also host of the Listen, Learn, and Love podcast with over 500 episodes. On March 5th, he posted, things we don't agree with or understand can't just be dismissed as, quote, woke. That feels intellectually shallow. When we disagree, we can state the facts of our positions without invoking emotionally charged language. That just further divides us. Let's be better. So my final invitation, number 4, I invite, I implore you to take inventory of the ways in which you engage in discussions, be it with loved ones, neighbors, folks in and outside of your faith community, no matter where they are on their faith journey /crisis/expansion. Ask yourself, how can I keep my emotions in check when discussing these things we may not agree on, and focus on making sure this individual feels seen and heard? That is it. Ooh, that is a lot. However, I felt really prompted to share all of it with you today. Please share it with your families, your friends, loved ones. Let's get some open, genuine, real, respectful, loving conversations started. If you are ready to get the care and attention you deserve through one-on-one coaching, I invite you to reach out. Connect with me on my website, meganskidmorecoaching.com, where you can subscribe to get my free Pronouns 101 guide, sign up for the monthly parent support group I facilitate through the Dallas Hope Charities, and download my free 20-plus page LGBTQ+ resource guide for families. As always, shoot me an email at hello@meganskidmorecoaching.com with any questions or comments about this episode. And please help the podcast grow by following, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and sharing it with friends. We're in this together. Until next time, thanks for joining.